Hello and welcome to the Dissidents podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Armin Navabi, David Bernstein, and Mike Burke discuss homophobia in relation to Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, pinkwashing, the role of religion, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and more. Okay, hello everybody. I'm here with David Bernstein from the Institute for Liberal Values and the Institute for Jewish Liberal Values as well, and Armin Navabi, and we're going to discuss his article, Queers for Palestine and the Death of Irony, which is amusing. It's really amusing that anything in his article isn't immediately obvious, but apparently these things have to be explained to some people, even intelligent people. Armin, you're also a member of the Ex-Muslims Association, is that correct?
Well, I mean, Atheist Republic is our organization, and also I think you're referring to secular jihadists.
Okay, that's
secular
the one.
jihad. Yes. Yes.
Very good. And you were born in Iran?
Yes.
And grew up there?
Actually, this is why I wanted to write this article and go around and telling people how insane it is to support for leftists to support Islamists as a way for liberation, as a way to fight for freedom or liberation, because this is what the same mistake that leftists made more than 40 years ago in Iran. They supported Islamists to fight against the monarchy, trying to bring liberation to Iran, and it backfired on them. It worked, and the leftists managed to put the Islamists in power. Many leftists, again, not all, have a revolution, anti-imperialist fetish it's not really. I've been convinced, as talking to them, it doesn't really matter what the result is. What matters is to do the revolution, to do the anti-imperialism, to do the whatever, to fight the power, right? It doesn't really matter if you show them the power is bringing stability. Not all power is bad, right? Not all, because they have this oppressor versus oppressee mentality that they just divide the whole world into, and whoever is at the top must be the evil one, and whoever is lower in power must be the good one, right? They must be the good. And back in Iran 40 years ago, the left, that you had a revolution fever going around all around the world, and they just wanted a revolution in Iran as well. And it was a completely artificial revolution as well, because there wasn't that much of a demand for a revolution. The economy was growing very well. Iran was progressing very fast. There was security. I mean, there were problems. There weren't enough political freedoms, but you could see that the political freedoms were coming. There was a genuine attempt to give people more political freedom. The Shah was bringing on more education. He was trying to bring in women rights, education for women, bring a lot of making a lot of cultural changes, making a lot of industrial changes. There wasn't really, if any country didn't need a revolution, it was this one. But the leftists, unfortunately, in Iran managed to somehow use the network, using the Islamic mosque network available to them to spread their ideology and cause and merge their revolutionary desires with the Shia ideology and create a leftist Shia version of their ideology. And with that, because they didn't have the network, they had the ideology, they had all the theory, but they didn't have the networking and the access to people to be able to bring on a revolution. They used the imams and the network in the mosques and all the mullahs basically to be able to access the people, and they merged their ideology with Shia ideology, and they managed to put the mullahs in power. And once they put the mullahs in power, they actually started using the mullahs to pass out a lot of executions and terrorist activities to basically completely destroy the bourgeoisie and the puppets of the imperialist West and anything that was any way associated with the monarchy. But as soon as all those people were eliminated, the mullahs basically then turned their attention to the leftists themselves, and they started the one of the greatest mass executions um, in the past 100 years. One of the forgotten executions, actually, in one of the mass executions of people that gets rarely talked about. The numbers, I don't know the exact numbers, but some estimates says is 30,000 or something of leftists were just, without trials, were just mass executed. And ever since then, all those leftist ideals have, only actually they kept some of them. Unfortunately, they kept the economic ones. That's why Iran's economy is suffering so much. So they basically kept some of them, but when it comes to all the other cultural ones, or all the other, when it comes to women rights, free speech, and all those things that are supposed to be leftist values, they all went away. They kept the economic ones, but everything, and we have had the biggest execution of LGBT people in Iran for the past 40 years. Some is, I know it's in the thousands. I get different numbers based on different reports in different places, but the ones that have been recorded, like, it's probably more than 3,000 people so far have been hanged in Iran, and hanged slowly to death. People have to realize that executions in Iran is not like other places. When people are hanged, people get this image of Western movies, when in the United States, where people were hanged, but it's a lot more brutal than that, because when you watch movies, Western movies, how people are hanged, there's usually a a door under your feet where you get just dropped suddenly and your neck breaks and you die. But that's not how they do it in Iran. When they hang you in Iran, they lift you slowly, right? So neck doesn't break. You slowly die. It's a slow death, and so they have doctors there. Sometimes it takes for a long time for you to die, and there's a doctor there constantly coming and checking to see if you die. There are some people that, under the pressure of the rope around their neck, they chewed out their own tongue. It's a very, very brutal way to go, and that's the way of the submit. I don't even understand why they do that, because Islamically, you're supposed to cut off their neck, but that's how they decided to go with their executions there. So, yeah, I mean, this is what we got. This is what it always backfires. Every time you try to use Islamists as a way to bring liberation, I don't know how many times this needs to happen for people to understand that Islamists are not going to bring you the liberation you want. I mean, they are far right, as far right as you can get. So, yeah, I mean, given that what I've seen happened to my country when leftists unite with Islamists, I just wanted to just warn other people not to make the same mistake, because we've seen the results.
But they are making the same mistake, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
As you're saying over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a complete failure in comparative thinking. To understand what is moral and what is possible in a society, you have to look at other societies. And for some reason, these people, they don't understand, or they that if they support the weaker party, they're not necessarily going to get the kind of society that they would like to live in, or they pretend to want to live in. It's really strange. I have to say, like, that there must be, these people must carry, either they're not very bright, and I think sometimes that's the case, or they must carry a tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance around, that they just don't know how to think about these issues. I don't know how one doesn't look at Hamas and say, this is not the kind of place I would want to live in if I'm LGBTQ.
Right. Yeah, not even in the West Bank. It's not even a good place to be LGBT.
You get thrown off the rooftops. And there are many Palestinians who come into Tel Aviv. Gay Palestinians who come into Tel Aviv. That's where their lives are.
Yes.
That's where they can express themselves. It's kind of an irony.
Yeah, exactly. So Israel is not just the best place to be LGBT for Israelis in the Middle East, it's also the best place to be LGBT for Palestinians to be in the Middle East. Like
For
there are
sure.
many institutions within Israel that tries to provide a safe place for Palestinians, LGBT Palestinians to come, and provide. There was just recently somebody who was kidnapped out of Israel into West Bank and was
Yeah.
beheaded for being
Yeah,
being
I saw that.
LGBT, which is insane. Yeah. So I don't know, and a lot of people. It's amazing the conspiracy theories, because people think that Israel does LGBT just so that it could, just so that it could
Position
excuse
itself.
all the
It's called
crimes. Yeah,
pink washing. It's called
Right.
pink washing. Yeah,
But
it's called being a
imagine the
liberal
level.
society.
I know. Yeah, I mean, imagine all those activists in Israel that their motivation is to bring LGBT rights for their country, and then somebody accuses them, oh, you're doing all of this so that you can make excuses for the war crimes of Israel. Like, I'm pretty sure that's not what their agenda is. I mean,
No.
I talked to a lot of them. These people genuinely care about LGBT rights.
Sure they do. Sure they do.
Yeah. Another thing is that, I've been thinking about this. A lot of far right people have this idea that if you're in power, like they have a power fetish. Like whoever is powerful, they admire that.
Yeah,
and they
like
think
Putin.
that just being just
Right.
showing this, just showing power and being alpha, like this alpha image that you have.
Yeah.
They just love that, they just fall for that. It doesn't. They think you're in the right as long as you show that you're powerful.
Yeah.
And the opposite is with this far left people, that if you're weak, that if you're then that must be that shows that you're in the right. But I like to think of liberalism is in this happy middle, right? Because this is why both far left people and far right people hate liberalism. Because far left people hate liberalism because it just works and it becomes powerful. The more liberal a country is, the more it brings prosperity and stability, and it just works. So it ends up being a more powerful country. And because it ends up being a more powerful country, far left people think that you must be in the wrong. You are the one who's doing the weaker people harm, and we need to. And because they have a revolution fetish, they want to bring you down. The reason why far right people hate liberalism is because the way that liberal societies use that power. Because part of liberalism is to use that power to protect the weak, right? So liberalism has this obsession with protecting, women's rights, LGBT rights, minority rights, refugee rights, immigration rights, and they gain the power, but then they use that power to protect weak people, the weaker people. And that's why, and because far right people don't look at all of these people as people who don't deserve protection. They're anti-LGBT, anti-women's rights, anti-immigration rights. That's why they don't like liberalism. But that's why I love liberalism, because it manages to gain the power and then it uses that power for good.
Well, it kind of holds those two forces in tandem, doesn't it? So, if you look at conservatives often have some really, really worthwhile points, and people on the left don't understand them. I mean, recently I was teaching a class on conservatism at university, and I was trying to find some texts to use that were critical of conservatism, but from an informed point of view. And I couldn't find any. People were saying that conservatism exists on a spectrum with fascism, but conservatism, when it's done right, would say, well, look, I want to conserve. David, you mentioned this in your book. Actually, I want to conserve those liberal institutions that have brought about the kind of diversity and prosperity that we have today. Liberalism can hold those people, but those people, the problem with that kind of ideology may be that they might be a little bit too cautious when it comes to change. Whereas people on the left will tend to be, as you pointed out, the extreme left will kind of be this revolution fetish where let's tear down the whole of society because we can make something infinitely better. When, we know from Armin Burke in his reflections on the revolutions in France, where that goes, right? We know what happened in the French Revolution. We then know what happens in the Bolshevik Revolution. We know what happened in Iran in 1979. We know what happens in these revolutions. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on. But a little bit of this kind of this overemphasis towards let's change things, let's make things better all of the time, which is indicative even of slightly left-wing thought, that's helpful so long as it's held in balance within the liberal system, and that's
Right.
where liberalism triumphs.
Right. It's sort of a balance between change and continuity, and that's the kind of equilibrium you're looking for. Going
Yes.
back to Armin's point about power fetish versus weakness fetish, ironically, in the Arab world, it's a major power fetish. It's not a weakness fetish, and so the people that the far left glorifies actually have the opposite view of power than they do. My mom is from Baghdad, Iraq, so I grew up
Right.
with a bit of this culture in my home, and I remember my grandmother. She was a big fan of Ronald Reagan, and my 18-year-old self, I think I was probably 18 around then, was not, and we'd have these sort of arguments in this tortured Arabic of mine, and then when Reagan won, she came over to me and she said, "See, I was right," because in her mentality, the right person is the more powerful one. Like that was vindication of her view that Reagan was the right president. And I realized that that's a mentality, a culture that exists in much of the Middle East, and so it's so ironic that you have these leftists who think that weakness is good when the people that they're championing absolutely do not believe that.
That's very interesting that you say that about in the Middle East, because I see this as a Sunni Shia divide, right? Because when Islam took over, the ones that managed to build the empires, either it was the Abbasid, the Umayyad Empire, and then the Abbasid Empire, and then the Ottoman Empire. These were at first the Umayyad and the Abbasid, they weren't called Shia Sunni, but proto-Sunnis and proto-Shias, right? So the people who were eventually called Sunnis, they were the ones who managed to take over and rule. The ones who eventually were called Shias, they were the oppressed ones, and they were the ones who weren't in power, and they were the rebels against the power at be. So that's why the people who were eventually called Sunnis, they were so impressed with themselves, they couldn't understand, even they were surprised with how easy it was to take down empires and build their own empire. So they thought God must be on their side, and God is on the side of the victors. So you being victorious shows that Allah is on your side.
Yes.
And in the same way, the Shias were like, well, we must be right because we're oppressed, and God is on the side of the oppressed. So they both built that into their ideology. Sunnis believe that God is, being victorious means God is on your side, and Shias believe being oppressed means God is on your side. And this whole ideology kind of shifted in the past 100 years, since World War I. And then two things changed this ideology between Sunnis and Shias. World War I and the Islamic Revolution in Iran, because ever since World War I, the Sunnis realized that they are weak compared to Western societies, and they were like, what are we doing wrong? And some people decided that what we're doing wrong is that we need to become more like Westerners, and some people decided like, no, we need to go back to Islam. And in the Shia world, Shias believe that true Muslims are never in power until the Mahdi comes back, so we cannot maintain a government. But then the Islamic Revolution of Iran happened, and now they're in power. So they both the Sunnis and the Shias had a crisis of identity, because the Shias were now in power and they had their own government, and the Sunnis were looking at themselves and asking themselves, why are we so weak? So this was a crisis of identity moment for both of them.
Yeah. I remember a documentary years back. It was my first exposure to sort of Islamist ideology in the Middle East, and these were mostly Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood people talking. And I remember the guy saying something, I'll never forget it. He said, the Jews in Israel, every single one of them prays to their God, and that's why they've been victorious. And his own understanding of the failure of Islam in the shame of being defeated by the Jews was that they had failed their God, and that God was angry at them for not for not being faithful. And so I think some of this is sort of to redeem their God, by showing strength and showing faithfulness. So I've always felt that was sort of a key insight of mine in listening to the discourse over the years. But I think power is interesting, and there's no doubt in my mind that Hamas and much of the Palestinian polity thinks that Israel's been in retreat for the last several years. They interpreted the Israeli departure from Lebanon, I just don't remember the exact year, as a defeat. They viewed the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza in 2005 as a retreat. They viewed Oslo and Israel's withdrawal from parts of the West Bank as a retreat. So they think that they're winning and the time is on their side. And if they keep on fighting and fighting and fighting, eventually Israel will just leave all of Palestine. That's the mentality that informs the way that they think, the way that Hamas thinks about the situation.
See, this is one of the most twisted realities about the Israel-Palestine conflict, is that the culture is such, the liberal culture within Israel is such that people are ready to forgive. People are ready to say to the Palestinians, okay, what is it that you want? We will make sacrifices. For example, there are no Jews left in Gaza anymore. Communities that have been there since ancient times were uprooted and forcibly moved by other Jews back into, the center of Israel, right? And the thinking there was, well, if we do this, if we make sacrifices, if we give them what they want, there'll be peace. But it seems that you're right. It seems that they see something like that and they celebrate it. They're happy. Okay, we've got something from Israel, and Israel thinks, oh, that's a positive sign. They're happy, great. And actually, they just see it as a defeat and a sign of weakness in Israel. So it's more of an ability to push back, which underlines that one of the saddest realizations that I've come to since the horrors that happened when we woke up on the 8th, that we just became aware of, which is a two-state. There are no concessions unless there is a fundamental change, unless, maybe Saudi Arabia might be capable of influencing something. I don't know, but that's pie in the sky at the moment. Unless there is a fundamental change, any concessions that are given to the Palestinians, who support Hamas, by the way, will be seen as victories, a sign that God is on their side, and a sign that, literally a sign, a religious sign that we need to be pushing on, and we need to be inflicting more and more horrors on Israel, because that will win us more and more victories. And that seems to be the way that they see things. There can't be any concessions made to them. Not because we don't want to give them concessions, not because we wouldn't be prepared to give them concessions if those concessions would give us peace, but because they'll just give us more war.
Yeah. That's what the Israeli public came to that conclusion after the crash of the Camp David process. So you had the early 1990s, you had the Oslo process. Many Israelis believed that it was going to inevitably lead to peace. That was sort of the language of inevitability that was used during that time. You get to Camp David 2000, and they start to negotiate, and the thing falls through. Then there's, Taba and other efforts around that same time, right afterwards, that also fell through. And then Arafat unleashes the second intifada, the Al-Aqsa intifada this time. And it really, for the average Israeli, they had stripped themselves of their national myths. They had sort of made themselves vulnerable. And to be repudiated that way, I think many Israelis just concluded at that time that the Palestinian world was not anywhere near ready for peace, that they weren't going to take a deal that didn't get all their maximalist demands, that their problem was Jewish statehood, period, and that they would continue to see any concession as weakness. Do I think, that's how King Hussein of Jordan perceived it when there was a peace deal and there were some very minor territorial shifts? I don't think that that's how he necessarily saw it, because I think he is fundamentally, or was fundamentally, a Westerner. But I do think that that's how a lot of the Arab world sees it. I've always been a fan of the notion of unilateral withdrawal, like starting with Gaza. Obviously, that hasn't worked out so well, but I have to be honest that it hasn't worked out well because of this different notion of what power is. And immediately when the Israelis left Lebanon, they were followed up with rocket fire, and Hezbollah saw it as a total act of weakness. Immediately when Israel left Gaza, Hamas took it over and started, building up its armaments and bringing in cement to build tunnels. they saw it as weakness in both cases. So it's really hard to imagine how it wouldn't be seen. And even if not everybody, and this is where Westerners get really confused, they talk to diplomats, they talk to intellectuals, they talk to professors, they talk to media personalities, they talk to people who know how to talk the language of the West. And they assume that those rational actors that they've got to know in their various interactions represent Palestinian society. So as a result, they don't understand that it doesn't. Even if 50% of the people buy into this sort of notion of power makes right, that's enough to actually make peace impossible. But they're sort of unable to understand the cultural milieu they operate because they don't actually deal with that other 50%.
But it's really, really interesting how they can make these bold statements about, you know, the Palestinians do this, the Palestinians do that, have a decent historical blow-by-blow knowledge of this happened, then this happened, right, in terms of a chronology of events, show that they're quite intelligent in terms of being able to articulate their points, and yet not have the intellectual curiosity to actually look up, and it's not hard, you know, you don't have to even read a book, you can go on YouTube, look up what Hamas themselves are saying. Because they tell you, repeatedly, emphatically, they tell you all of what we've just said. They boast about it.
Right.
But two things that might give us some hope is that Hamas is very unpopular actually in Gaza. So that's a good thing, right? And also Saudi Arabia is very keen on moving forward with the Abrahamic Accord. Even after all of this, like, I know they got a major hit and they have to delay it, but I didn't think they're going to come and say this very soon, but they already just came out and say like, oh yeah, we're doing this. Normalization with Israel is still going forward. I thought they're going to wait a year at least before they say that after this attack.
I thought a year.
Yeah. They are pissed. They are really, really, really. So I'm talking American now. Pissed in British English means drunk. So sorry if I'm confusing any of my English listeners. They're very, very angry. So there was an interview that was done recently on the one of the Saudi national broadcasters, and you know nothing goes on there that doesn't get fully
endorsed by the government.
By the government. And one of the Hamas leaders was brought in for an interview, and he was raked across the coals.
Yeah.
Raked across. I'll find it for you. It's on, that YouTube channel that translates them on Medi
It was
TV.
a woman interview.
It was a woman doing it.
Clearly she was doing so bad. Yeah.
Yeah, and
exactly.
that's so symbolic that it's a woman doing
what
it.
happened?
So
what happened? What happened?
So she was basically interrogating one of these, I can't remember his name, one of these Hamas leaders.
One of the leaders,
about why did you do this? Why did you do this without letting the Arab world know? Why did you do this full stop? Why were you involved in all these horrors? What's going on? Why, what would make you think that this was a good idea? And she was really angry, and it was a woman, not with her face covered up or anything. So immediately it's like, this is
castigating a Hamas leader.
Right. Yeah, so it's immediately, this is the new Saudi. It's, exactly. All of this is symbolic. In the West, you wouldn't realize it. Yeah, I'll find it for you. We'll put it in the notes, right? But in the West, if you're a normal Westerner and you're looking at that, you'd think, well, there's nothing symbolic. She disagrees with him. It's like, no. The Saudi regime disagrees with him strongly. Right. She's being told to say that. And it's very telling that it's a woman. It's very, that's very symbolic. So that was really, really interesting. And now we've got Saudi Arabia shooting down rockets that are headed towards Tel Aviv, from the Houthis. I mean, we know that they hate the Houthis. I think that the Saudis understand that they're ultimately enemies with Iran. And there's no
Islam Republic.
Yeah, exactly. That they ultimately have to fight this fight. That they're bound to the West and they're bound to Israel. And this is the strategic logic is such as that this is what should happen in their region as a check against Iran. And by the way, maybe seeing Israel's strength, going back to this idea of strength and power, maybe after Israel reacted the way that they did, with a clear resolve of destroying Hamas, that probably gave the Saudis a lot of confidence, even if they questioned it when the Hamas guys came in. But by the way, Armin, I'm not necessarily sure that Hamas is as unpopular as you think. I mean, the polling data shows that Haniya would win over Abbas. Now, does that mean that, and this was a couple years ago, but it was not that old. Does that mean that today's Gazans, after what had just happened, would still think that way or vote that way or whatever. I have no idea. And that's only two. There's only two choices given in a poll like that. But still, that's what the latest data show.
Well, the Arab Barometer did a poll that I think started in September. I'm not sure what month in 2023, but do you know the day that ended was October 6th, 2023.
Really?
Okay. So I don't. So go check that poll. So the level of dissatisfaction with Hamas, that poll, like this is an unbelievable coincidence that we have a snapshot of what people in Gaza think right the day before the attack. I don't know exactly how the attack is going to influence this, but it's not good. It's not good. There's it's dissatisfaction with the economy, with corruption, with everything, and the lack of trust for Hamas. And the part that surprised me the most was most of the economic. I thought most people in Gaza would blame Israel for their economic situation, but they were blaming Hamas. I couldn't
because
believe
they know that they steal all the resources, and I'm sure that these pictures of these private jet flying Hamas leaders have made their way around,
right.
like probably aided by Israeli efforts as well. But if I were Israel, I'd be pumping a lot of that stuff into these smartphones in Gaza right now. So I imagine some of that's happening.
Can I show you? I don't know if I can show you a video. I have a video of a guy in Gaza that is on the rooftop yelling for the world to come and America to come save us from Hamas. So that was all right. So look at this. It's like, so this guy on the rooftop saying, "Oh world, we don't have work. Oh America, take Hamas from us. Oh America, oh world, we don't have money. We pay it to Hamas." Oh, and here I have another video. I want to show you this as well. Hold on, just give me a second. And I know these are not polling data. It's not as effective as polling data, but we also do have the polling data that I mentioned from Arab Barometer. But here's a mother in Gaza that just lost her child in the bombardment, and she's saying, "Okay. Do you speak Arabic, David?"
I grew up speaking it with my grandmother, but it's been many years since she died, so I know some.
Okay. So let's see if you understand this.
I saw this video. They all shut her down. So they all shut her up. They said,
this guy is shutting her. Yeah, so this guy in the black is trying to shut her up. So she's saying this is all the fault of the Hamas dogs. So she's blaming the loss of life in Gaza on Hamas. So, but look how this guy comes and tries to shut her up right away because they know the consequences of speaking like this in Gaza. Look at you see the hand going for the mouth?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I like to be hopeful. I like to try to believe in people. Yeah. So I don't know.
But there's another part of me that, in the spirit of intellectual honesty, that also has to say, look, when that one Hamas terrorist called his parents and said, "Mom, Dad, I had murdered, I killed 9 Israelis," right? Now, some people would say, well, his parents didn't look so enthusiastic. They just wanted him to come home alive. But the fact is that clearly there was some kind of culture that supported that. In other words, no one in the United States, no American soldier is going to call from wherever, Germany or Iraq, and say, "Mom, aren't you going to be proud of me? I killed 9 Iraqis." Oh, yeah. And so I think that we have to understand that there is a culture. It may not be everywhere. It may not be everywhere equally in it, but there's a culture that supports, the Shaheed, that supports these ideas as well.
And the culture is called Islam. It's called Islam. That's what the culture is. I'm
going to push back on that a little bit in a second, but can we put this in context a little bit in terms of this celebratory culture, right? Let's give it a bit of time, okay? So not only did we see the videos of these, and we don't know how many of them were doing this. We don't have polling data on this, okay? So let's take this with a pinch of salt, right? But those videos were gleeful. They were going in there. They were executing people. They were uploading it to the internet. They were happy. They were phoning their parents.
It's
and then
Jew hatred.
Right, and
it's
then
Jew hatred. Yeah.
Well, clearly. Although, by the way, I think that
killed
if
those Thai guys too.
Yeah, and if they had the chance to get hold of me as a non-Jew,
they would have shot you.
And the Arab Israelis, and the Arab Israelis. Yes,
Although, by the way, I become a Jew when I think I'm talking to an anti-Semite. They say, "You're a Jew." Yes, I am. It's like when you meet a homophobe. You're gay. That's right.
I tell them I'm a proud Zionist. I keep telling people that I'm a proud Zionist. I try to say that anywhere I go. Every time I get the excuse, I will tell people I'm not a Jew.
Amazing.
I'm not Israeli, but I'm
absolutely,
a Zionist.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm well on board with that. Like that's the kind of solidarity that we have to have. But anyway, so we don't have polling data, but we can see the glee from the videos. And we can also see scenes in Gaza right now where, in spite of not having enough electricity, they're rigging up massive cinema screens and showing videos of these people being murdered. And there are crowds in attendance cheering it on. So I think it's not unreasonable to say that this isn't a significant thing. And let's put that into context. If you go back and you look at the Nazis, after doing horrible stuff in concentration camps, a lot of them would have to go and get drunk. A lot of them knew what they were doing was wrong. They'd do it, and they were evil, and the rest of it. But at least there was some registering.
That's why they had to hide it.
Right.
That's why they had to hide it. Unlike Hamas that records it and broadcasts this, the Nazis knew how evil what they were doing is, so they had to hide it. From the Germans, from their own family, their own wives didn't know what they were doing.
Themselves sometimes, you need to get blind drunk about this kind of thing. And look, from a kind of a sheer industrial output point of view, of course, the Nazis are by far the greater evil because they were, from a consequentialist point of view, managing to do as many deaths. But even if you think about the concentration
camps, if Hamas had the same resources,
worse.
It would have been way worse. You
wouldn't be putting people into the saying, "Oh, you're going into the showers," and then gassing them. It would be
they tortured the family. They tortured children in front of their own family, their parents.
Raping women and then phoning up their parents to let them know what they're doing at the same time. That kind of thing.
No, they tied an entire family around each other, and they tortured the kids in front of their parents, cutting their fingers and hands and gouging the eyes of the parents in front of the children. This is beyond what the Nazis could have done. In numbers,
Yeah, I mean, the evil is way beyond. I mean, I agree.
Beyond ISIS. It's beyond ISIS. It's beyond
way
ISIS.
Beyond ISIS. Beheading by in comparison, and having that was the symbol of barbarism.
There were actually just a few spectacular beheadings. They used it as a political tool, but this was sort of an ecstatic experience for them. They were in a state of ecstasy when they were doing it.
Yeah, this is as much as I hate Islam and I'm anti-Islam, this was even beyond Islam. This was beyond Islam. Yeah. This was a level of Jew hatred that you don't see you don't see among Nazis, you don't see in Islam, you don't see anywhere else.
Right. I heard something very fascinating, though, by the way. This is interesting. I heard that in one place, there were two different units that were, and maybe one of the kibbutzes or one of the places that got hit. One was a Hamas unit, and the other one was an Islamic Jihad unit. And the Islamic Jihad unit, obviously, they were going in, they were slaughtering Israelis, but they were apparently they were more disciplined. Like they weren't raping. They took an Israeli woman and they made her wear a towel or some kind of shirt over her clothing, because so they were more likely to abide by what their own version of Islamic law than the Hamas guys were operating the same areas, who were just slaughtering, burning, and they asked people, is this in line with Islam? There were some interviews that the Israelis were doing of these captured Hamas guys, and they say, does Islam condone what you did? And he said, no, it doesn't. Very interesting. Like, I was trying to understand, like, well, then why did you guys do it? Like, if that's not your understanding of Islam.
I mean, Muhammad executed 700 Jews in a day or so. This is part of Islamic,
Right.
mythology, part of Islamic stories. They basically did collective punishment on an entire Jewish community based on the perceived actions of a few of them. They got the Muhammad order. They got the entire tribe. They took the men, children, and women. They decided to execute all the men and sold the women and the children into slavery. And with that money, Muhammad bought weapons and horses and other stuff like that. But the women and children were sold into slavery of the Jews. And actually, a lot of Muslims see how kind Muhammad is, who didn't kill the women and children. He only sold them to slavery. And Muhammad, the way that they decided who's the children is that they pulled out their pants, and anybody who had pubic hair was old enough to be executed, and anybody who didn't would be sold to slavery as a child. That's how they decided. But by the way, a lot of boys get their pubic hair, I don't know, in age 12, 13. So that means that was considered adult enough to be executed, according to Muhammad.
Yeah.
This is Islamic
So
teaching. A lot of people try to make.
What do you make? What do you make of the more of the Muslim countries where there's less sort of Islamist ideology, where there's more maybe a Sufi bent, or I mean, you use the term Islam is evil, or you hate Islam, but don't you think that there are versions of Islam where they emphasize different aspects of the tradition?
No, it's countries that take. It's not different versions of Islam. It's basically doing less of Islam, right? So the reason why you see modernization in Islamic worlds is not because they're inventing new versions of Islam that is more moderate. They're inventing new versions of Islam is a defense mechanism in response to modernity. So it's the reason why some Islamic countries are moving past a lot of these backward beliefs. It's the same reason why Europe moved past a lot of these backwards beliefs. It's not because Christianity became better. It's because these societies became less Christian, right? So
Yeah.
it's modernization that makes it.
Christianity took its place in these societies that and was subsumed into other political and cultural functions. Like, look, I mean,
right.
I mean, and so it's not. Is that less Christianity or a different Christianity? I think you could argue it either way.
Even if it's a different Christianity, it's not the difference. It's not the difference of Christianity that made the societies progress. The societies were progressing. There were better ideas that were challenging the religious ones, and to stay relevant, to not die out, you had to change your the interpretation of your religion so you stay relevant. It's not that they change their religion, therefore they modernize. It's that they modernize, and at the way to keep their religion, they had to change their religion. So the modernization was coming. This is just a defense mechanism as a way to keep the religion. So it's not that religion changed from within as society progressed as a result of it. The chain of causation is the other way around.
I'm not sure I entirely buy that. I think
neither do I.
Accidental changes in Christianity that emerged because of the monarchy and so forth, that changed the nature of Christianity, that then allowed, as a result of it, allowed.
Show me one teaching from Islam or Christianity that is responsible for modernity. It's the Enlightenment values.
The sins of the father.
Yeah.
The sins of the father.
That's a horrible teaching.
No. The sins of the father the sins of the father belong to the sins of the father, and they're not the sons. That's from Christianity, right? That's one of the points. We must render unto Caesar his dues and God unto his dues, which gives you separation between church and state.
That's from a religion that tells you that we're all sinners because of the sin of Adam.
But you're asking me for one example, and I just gave you two. I just gave you two examples of, and by the way, cherry picked. Okay, so like I'm holding my hands up. I am cherry picking these. I'm not saying that you would get, if you were to go through a literalist interpretation of Christianity, you would get all kinds of nightmares, and some of those traditions still exist. The same thing is true of Judaism. The same thing is obviously true of Islam, right? So I think there is something to be said for. I don't think that the temptation is to say that there is an authentic Judaism, that there is an authentic Islam, that there is an authentic Christianity. And I don't think that any of those things are true. What I think is more important than the scripture, that is the Quran, the Hadith, the Torah, the Old Testament and the New Testament, is the communities that interpret them. Right, and the belief, what those people believe is what they believe. So if they say this is my Islam, then that's what they believe.
Oh yeah,
then it's their Islam.
Yeah, I don't,
and there's nothing you or I can do about that, right? If they say this is my Christianity,
I think.
So when you see these kind of,
I'm not doubting that for a second.
If I may finish this point, because I think this is important, right? I think that there are two kind of mistakes. It's the same kind of mistake that's made, right? So the temptation of those on who would tend to ally themselves with the ideological right would be to look at the likes of ISIS. You can't probably do Hamas for the reasons that you just articulated, right? Because they go even beyond that. But let's say they'd look at ISIS and they would say, okay, we can go through the Hadith and we can go through the Quran and we can find pretty solid justification for them to behave in which the way that they do. And I would agree with them. And then they would say, well, okay, this is an authentic Islamic group. And I would agree with them with that too. And it's dangerous, and therefore Islam is dangerous for all of those reasons. And I agree with all of that. But what they would then say is they would then look at a more liberal group. And I admit that there are relatively few of these. But they would look at a more liberal group and they would say, okay, these Muslims are selectively cherry picking the nice bits of the Quran and the Hadith.
There is no nice bits. There is no nice bits of the Quran and Hadith. But go on.
Well, there is no compulsion in religion, and whatever.
No, the you don't understand what that verse is talking about.
The Mecca and Medina part. Well, no, but I don't need to, and neither do they.
No,
so they might be getting it wrong.
There's no compulsion. There's no compulsion in what religion you pick, but there is compulsion in the religious rulings. It makes it very clear. So you could remain a Christian and you could remain a Jew if you want. That's there's no compulsion in that.
People of the book, right?
Yeah, but you have to abide by Islamic laws. There's compulsion in that.
Yeah,
Islam is a lot harder to liberalize than Christianity and Judaism.
I completely agree.
Here's the thing. I think we're misunderstanding. The disagreement is I'm for reform. I'm for reforming Muslims.
Jihad, right?
I'm not for reforming. No. I'm not for reforming Islam. I'm for reforming Muslims. Okay, because here's the thing: you cannot find in Islam anything that supports LGBT rights, women rights, secularism, democracy. None of these. You can't find a hadith or Quranic verses that supports any of these. But you can find many Muslims who support all of these things.
Right.
Many of them. Okay. So, but when I see a lot of Muslims that support these, I don't give the credit to Islam. I give the credit to the Muslim.
To the Muslims, fine.
I think it's a disservice to the Muslim is to give their maturity and their understanding of the values that make the world a better place. But I don't think you need to give the credit to Islam because the source of those values is not Islam.
No, but they might have an entirely different understanding of what Islam is to them, and it may be completely incongruent with what the Hadiths and the Quran say. And in a sense, that doesn't matter. We can give credit to that.
That's fine if they think that.
And some of them do.
I could
very few of them relatively.
And I would disagree with them. And we could have that disagreement. But that's fine. That's fine for them to have that view. I think the source. Here's the thing: what is Islam? Okay, you cannot separate Islam. If you manage to separate Islam from the Quran and Hadith, then you have made up a completely new thing that I don't know why you're calling it Islam. You cannot divorce Islam from the Quran.
I don't care. I don't care if they want to do that.
I'd like you to spend some more time in understanding the Jewish experience for a second, Armin. Let me just explain to you something. I'm basically an agnostic. Okay, I'm an agnostic. I'm not an atheist like you, but I go to synagogue regularly, okay? And I go to synagogue and I read, by the way, in the back of my Chumash, which is the 5 books of Moses, essays that are critical, that include biblical archaeology in the back of it, that are critical of my own tradition, okay? And now there are people in the Jewish tradition who will say what I'm practicing is not Judaism. They'll say that, no, that's not real Judaism. But I don't care. Because I'm still listening to some of this. Wait a second.
There's a difference.
I'm still listening because what we've done is we've reinterpreted Judaism in light of modernity. And it's fine. Like, and by the way, I prefer that interpretation of Judaism, this liberal version of Judaism that really just wants me to be a better person and reflect on my sins, and I prefer that to sort of than the secular alternatives that have emerged, like woke ideology, which seems to be filling in a void. So it's like, I think, like, I worry, and I've said this to Ayaan Hirsi Ali too and others, that I worry that if we can't find a liberal version of Islam, I think here's a tactical mistake on your part. I understand you look at Islam and you see all the hadith and you see Sharia and all the rest, and you say, okay, this is what the true Islam is. But I think the much more likely success story will be when a group of people, enough of them, a critical mass, reinterpret Islam in a way that's liberal. I think that will go further, because it will still fill that void that they in the body politic that needs to be filled. That's my own view.
I think I'm not explaining what I'm trying to say here very well. I welcome when people try to reform Islam, but I see it as a sign of defeat. I don't see it as, because I welcome it because it means that the liberalization of society and modernization of society is working, and they are desperately trying to keep Islam alive, so they have no choice but to do that. I want people to recognize the reason why that is happening is not because, it doesn't happen from within religion. It comes from outside. That happens because the pressure from outside of religion. Religion is a tool to get power. People that have power, they always change because there's external pressures, not an internal willingness to change.
I'm not sure that's true.
If you want to see, so here's the thing:
it can be true, but it's not always true. Right?
Martin Luther, for example.
Martin Luther was not a force for liberalism at all. He was more radical than the Catholics. For his time, he was more radical than the Catholics.
Come
he was
on,
more anti-Jew, more anti-woman.
That's true.
He was more anti-woman. He was more anti-Jew. He was a lot more radical. The Protestants weren't. It wasn't because of the Protestant Reformation that Europe became more liberalized and modernized. It was because of the Enlightenment movement that came after. Right? It was because of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment movement.
Part of that was required. It wasn't to recede. Yeah.
Yep. No, the thing that the Protestant Reformation did was it created a culture of revolution that may have helped, but it wasn't the ideas of the Protestant.
You were breaking the power of the Catholic Church, right? There was a right, and which was really really important.
Yes, I agree. I'm saying the weakness within the structure eventually led all these other ideas to come flood in, but it wasn't any ideas that was introduced that is responsible for modernity. That crack let in the competition to come from outside. I agree with that. And the thing is, I don't want to call it liberal Islam. I like to say liberal Muslims, okay? Because we don't have liberalism as a methodology, and Islam is not the source of it. Liberalism makes a lot of Muslims liberal. The Islam itself doesn't make people liberal, right? But here's why it's so important for me not to give credit to Islam and not to see changing Islam. If you enjoy more people interpreting Islam in a liberal way, then I think you should join me and putting more pressure on Islam instead of putting, because this is a response, this is a reaction to people who are fighting against religious ideology, that you see that happening, right? Because what more important than good conclusions are good methodologies. The scientific method, liberalism, Enlightenment values, these are methodologies that give us better results on average. Sometimes they give us wrong results, but the average it's like a machine that gives you more good results more often. And you have other methodology that gives you bad results or random results more often, and sometimes that accidentally it gives you some good results. And I don't want to endorse that methodology because sometimes we get something good out of it, and that methodology is revelation, it's faith, it's religion, it's superstitions. Sure, sometimes you get something good out of it, but I don't want to use that rare good results to just endorse that methodology as a whole. And with Judaism is different, because Judaism is a word for three completely different things. Judaism is the word for a religion, Judaism is the word for a culture, and Judaism is a word for an ethnicity. So which Judaism are we talking about here? Because I don't have, when it comes to traditions and rituals, they are all beautiful, whether they come from Islam or Judaism or Christianity. I mean, I look at a mosque and it's beautiful. I enjoy it. I look at Arabic calligraphy and enjoy it. I don't care if the fact that it comes from Islam or Judaism. These are just ritual art. And so if you're referring to that, we could celebrate all of that regarding the source of it. But what I have a problem is with false beliefs gives you false conclusions most of the time. And I don't want to endorse false beliefs.
But what if you had a version of Islam that didn't have those false beliefs or didn't value them that much? In other words, like, part of it, I have to tell you, again, going back to my being Jewish, and let's talk about it in the religious sense for a second. I almost never have conversations about God. I mean, sometimes the rabbi will talk about God, but it's not in the same authoritative sense.
Right.
Look, I have my wife converted to Judaism in a humanistic synagogue that actually is mostly atheistic,
Right.
and so I'm just saying that there are ways of conceiving of religion that are different than the kind of authoritative model that you have. And I don't know why reduce that to ritual, like that. Maybe the ritual that you're talking about, maybe those cultural traditions are the religion in that sense. Maybe the authority dissipates,
and if I may,
the confidence in those beliefs. Yeah.
If I may add another thing, it's not just Judaism. Anglican Christianity is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Or it was until it became subverted by wokeism. And now I don't want anything to do with it, right? And now it's just it's another religion. But it was kind of like, okay, well, let's try and find the hidden truths and the messages behind. Let's not read this literally. Let's try to be humble. Let's try to find the wisdom in this. And that's what it was. And it wasn't requiring you to believe in God.
No, okay, but if you're trying to find the wisdom in religion, you're using a compass that is outside of that religion, right? So, but let me just tell you this.
But maybe there's a different kind of wisdom that comes from these traditions, and as long as you're aware of which one you're using,
that?
Can I give you an example?
Can I respond to this? Because how would you if
I can give you an example.
The method. Let me make my point, okay? Because the problem is with the standard that this is right because God says so. That's a dangerous mindset to have.
Agreed.
If you're using if you are using a measurement, a tool outside of religion to find what in religion is a good teaching, then that's not religion. The standard is the problem. The problem is that thinking that this is a revelation from God. Let me tell you something. A lot of people ask me that, Armin, what if we introduced you to a religion that had all the best conclusions? It supported women's rights, gay rights, equality of opportunity, separation of powers, everything that you think is a good value. That was the teaching of the religion. I would say I would be against that religion more than any religion. And this would be the most dangerous religion on earth because it will give people the misunderstanding that methodology, because it has the good conclusions. I don't care about the good conclusions as much as I care about the right methodology. This religion will sell to the world that the methodology of revelation and superstition works. Right?
Yeah, but let me give you an example, a counter example of this, okay? Buddhism, for example. Look, I'm not a Buddhist. I know enough to know that it has a dogma that is often attached to traditional Buddhism, and B, that through thousands of years of practice, it developed this practice of meditation that is linked in ways to Buddhist cultural traditions. And that's a methodology, by the way, okay? That is a methodology. That is not just a dogma. And I believe that that's the case with other religions as well. So of course,
Buddhism is dangerous. I'm anti-Buddhism as well, but I could tell you why later.
But it can be. But there's a version of Buddhism that teaches you how to meditate and teaches you a process that liberalism will not allow you to acquire because liberalism's methodology will not help you meditate.
But the scientific method will show you the benefits of meditation. Absolutely. We have the scientific method.
It doesn't. The scientific method, yeah.
If it doesn't, then we don't need meditation.
It doesn't teach you how to meditate. It might tell you that it's healthy for you. And ultimately, by the way, those were derived from those religious practices. Ultimately, they were. They didn't come from the scientific method.
But we agree. They
came from a kind of human experience.
Yeah, so Mayan, there are ancient religions that tell you the correct things about the movement of stars. We don't But the way that we recognize what is good from the religion is with the scientific methods and other ways of us measuring it. The methodology of the religion is this is true because it's written in the scripture. And by the way, Buddhism is very dangerous for other reasons. I just want to remove that's. I want to
Living
take
in
the
Japan, I
meditation
agree.
out of. Yeah, okay. But let me introduce you with another word instead of reforming religion. That's something that I support: secularizing religion. Right?
Well, you see,
I
that's
see
what's
the
happened with Judaism and Anglican Christianity,
Yes.
right? It's become a secular kind of thing, and you enjoy the traditions, just for the drama,
yes,
just for the
exactly,
tradition and the link with the past, and a sense of community and a sense of connection to where you've come from.
Exactly.
That's where I see it. Absolutely.
I
continuity.
That
A
is
romantic
continuity. That is the exact opposite of Reformation, right? So what we in modern sense, when we're talking about Reformation, is the complete opposite of what is secularization. Secularization is like Christmas, right? Secularization is like being an atheist that still enjoys going to the church but doesn't believe in any of the nonsense. I just want to go. It has childhood memories. I enjoy it. Secularization means going to the synagogue because this is my culture, not because I believe any of this.
Or a mosque.
Secularization is like, I was going to say, like, I enjoy seeing like new Ramadan celebrations now in the United States where people are coming out without hijab and just like they're turning it into something like Christmas or something like that. That is, so the reason why secularization is the complete opposite of Reformation is because the goal of them is the polar opposite, right? So the problem with religion is the belief in revelation and belief in the methodology of how to come up with the right conclusions. So secularization ignores that core belief, just like David said, like, I don't want to talk about God to people. I just want to go, like, I just want to take part in this tradition. So it ignores the core beliefs and keeps the ritual, right? Reformation is kind of the opposite. Reformation tries to change the aesthetics or the way, the outside, to try to maintain the faith, to try to maintain the belief. So it does whatever it needs to do to modernize the religion as a way to save the belief in God or in Muhammad as a prophet or the Quran as the word of God. My problem is with the core belief. My problem is not with, I don't know, dancing in the way that your religion tells you, or wearing the costume, or doing the calligraphy. Those are all beautiful and enjoyable. And go ahead.
Can I suggest one? I get completely where you're going, and I'm on board with you. But the difference, and I couldn't speak to synagogues, but the difference between the complete secularization of Anglicanism, for example, would be if you want to go to an Anglican church and you do believe in God and you do have that meaning system, that you can still find it there. It's not prescribed, but you can still find it there if that's what you go in there looking for. The problem I have with where you're going, the problem I have with where you're going is not where you're going with it, right? Because you seem to be going in completely the right direction. I trust you as an individual to make meaning for yourself and end up being a very moral human being. Clearly you're bright enough, right? Clearly you're bright enough and well-informed enough to do that. But this is the whole problem that Nietzsche kind of foretold, right? When he said that God is dead. And people like to think of this kind of this declaration that God is dead as this is triumphant, and Nietzsche was completely ripping apart Christianity, and it was a lament, right? So how do people then? Because most people can't generate meaning in the way that you've just demonstrated to us that you can, right?
Because it assumes that people are rational, that have this ability to do critical thinking and rationality. And I used to think, like, okay, if religion disappears, then it's going to be filled with rationality. But of course, that doesn't happen. And the other thing about it is that I think that, this phrase that there's a God-sized hole in people. Even if there's no God, there still may be a God-sized hole in people. In other words, we may have evolved to need a certain kind of, and that writ large, not in every individual. Like I actually don't think I have a very strong need for a God in my life. But I think if I look at society as a whole, I think that there's a high percentage of people who really do need that in some ways for their moral sustenance, for their spiritual sustenance, in ways that maybe some of us don't. I mean, we have
no problem replacing that with the secular ways. So religion has this whole Well, we have seen that.
I want it to be true. I want what you're saying to be true. I'm just not sure it is.
It is true. I think it is true. It's given us wokeism.
No, I'm saying
No,
that
I don't.
I'm saying that I don't know that large swaths of society are capable of sustaining a moral system based on secular reasoning, even though I want
I
that
mean,
to be the case.
look at the Scandinavian country. They are
But
one of some of
they
the
evolved.
recently.
Okay, so
They
certain societies can
they
evolve
have,
that way over long periods of time,
And they're
right?
tiny,
I
by
mean,
the way.
no, these are countries that were very, very Christian quite recently, and now they are not religious at
But
all,
they're,
and they are some of the
but
happiest countries on the planet.
they're tiny. They're tiny. They're
Yeah,
tiny and they're very wealthy. So they're hardly kind of
but
big examples.
they're
The-
okay, but they're wealthy because of the methodology that they use. I mean, they're wealthy for the same reason that they're less religious. So they kind of correlated if you think about it
Possibly.
that
So
way.
possibly, if
But
we look at it that way, there may be a higher percentage of the kind of
um,
person that you are in those
I mean,
societies
look at
who is
Japan.
able to
I mean,
make.
look at Japan.
Right.
Look at
Japan is
Japan.
religious.
Religion, no, it's religious in a secularized way.
Yeah.
People
Okay.
in Japan, they don't think about so in Japan people treat their religion in a very, very secular way. It's just the rituals. Like, go ask them how much they care about, like how much they judge life based on the religion. They just
Okay.
go to the temple, they do the things, and I believe that's what I'm saying. Everything you need from religion is the rituals, is the aesthetics, and I'm saying that's the part of religion that is not harmful. That's what I'm saying. Secularize the religion. You
Japan,
could keep all of that.
but Japan is a
Yeah.
really kind of interesting example because the rules and rituals and assumptions of Japanese culture are so rigid that
Yeah.
it is bordering upon impossible for a Westerner to come to Japan and navigate them. Like you really.
But that's a different. But that's a different
but
problem.
these rules.
What I'm
See,
saying,
this is a meaning-making system. Religion is among a set. Religions are among sets of meaning-making system. The rigid Japanese cultural system is a meaning-making system. What I'm worried about is when you rip out a meaning-making system and you let something fill the void. Right now, clearly there are people who can do that. You're one of them. But wokeism seems to be a reaction to Christianity disappearing. It seems to be the thing that has leapt in and filled the void. Certainly, a lot of atheists that I know have become full woke.
Right.
So many religious people are woke.
I know.
Of course, you can put it on. You can either overlay it over religion or over secularism. But the fact is that there's a lot of young people that are less religious, and this is a system of meaning a meta narrative that they've bought into.
Yeah, it is a meta narrative. That's a good way. People need a meta narrative.
Here's another meta narrative that fills the void quite well: civic nationalism, right? Sense of meaning, sense of purpose, sense of belonging to a group that has a higher purpose. Civic nationalism. That's a fantastic void filler when it comes to people finding meaning.
Yeah,
and
but
it's not wokeism, and it's quite productive.
Armin, but it's evil and racist. Sorry, if anyone's listening, there was a smile when I said that, right? And it's not what I actually believe. But no, but this is a serious point to make, right? Because civic nationalism, any nationalism, is evil and racist, right? And that's being pushed by the elite institutions. You know, that's what the New York Times, Harvard consensus will tell you, that any form of nationalism is evil and oppressive. And if your country starts to do well, like if you're in Israel and you're proud to be an Israeli, and you start to say, I love Israel, I'm proud to be an Israeli, I'm not necessarily saying that I'm better than any other people morally, but I love Israel, and you're doing well, then that's a clear sign that you're an oppressor. And the reason why the Palestinians who live next door to you are doing bad is because you're oppressing them.
Right.
You know, so this kind of meaning system that you've just offered, maybe we need to make that. Or
we have that.
Well, you could go even beyond. I mean, this is the thing that I think that people don't miss about Israel, right? The problems that we have in Israel right now, will happen in the West.
Right.
Well, they already have, in fact.
Yeah, actually, Israel is such a good example, okay? Because I'm a Zionist, because I see Zionism as a version of civic nationalism, right? Zionism to me is just an Israeli version of civic nationalism, right? But look, Israel has become weaker against her enemies, not just because of Islam, but also because of religious Jewish beliefs. You know, it has.
Can't more than one thing be true? Like on these things,
right?
Like, yes,
that's what
of course. of course, religion can be both a source of strength and weakness at the same time, perhaps depending on what version of religion you're using. Like, I know some of the most compelling and interesting Israelis are modern Orthodox Jews, deeply philosophical, deeply Zionistic, definitely believe in God, but they've embraced a sort of modernity at the same time.
Of course.
I think they're the best of the best in some ways in that country, and some of the worst of the
Yeah.
worst are very extreme nationalists who would blow up a mosque, right, if they could. And so
But
I think both of those things
it's
can be
not
true.
binary. Yeah, I'm not okay. So this is not like an on or on switch. It's not like all or none. Like when I say religion is a source of problem, that doesn't mean every religious person is destructive and
No, but
harmful,
there are
and every
groups that
atheist
abide
person.
different,
Yeah.
that embrace different ideas around religion.
Every religious. So here's the thing: most of the time, religious people, okay, who are part of the solution, they're part of the solution usually not because of their religion. It's because of something else. Okay,
I'm a little less
so that's
confident in that than you.
so,
Right, I'm a little.
yeah.
I've seen a different reality where actually you have people, and sometimes it's hard to explain, but you have people who are deeply religious but also deeply liberal at the same time, and they cordon off their liberalism and their religion is a sort of has a place, and they don't assert it as like
right.
They won't say my religious belief doesn't entitle me to tell you must believe the way I do. Like they
that's
they
great.
just believe what they believe.
We celebrate that, but I don't. Here's the thing: if somebody is a liberal and religious, they're my allies in liberalism. I just don't give their liberalism to their religion. I don't think that they're liberal because of their religion. I think they're liberal because of the powers of liberalism has modernized the world and is dominating the world, and they are also joining me in that because liberalism just works.
But what if
it's not because of their Islam that they're liberal. It's not because of their Judaism or Christianity that they're liberal. It's because liberalism is taking over. That's why they're liberal. And I welcome them. I'm not just because I'm against religion, I'm not going to hold that against them. I'm not going to say I'm not going to work with you. I'm not going to welcome you in this liberal army because I disagree with you on religion.
Yeah.
So I could be anti-religion, but I see my fellow fighters for liberalism, whether they're atheists or religious, they could be very, very religious, and I will still be on their side.
I'm anti-religion when it oversteps the mark. You know, there is some evidence that shows that religious people tend to be better off, happier.
It's not religious people that
have more stable relationships. No, I know. But if there is those if there are those, okay, causation and correlation are not the same thing. I do get it. But if there are those correlations, and it certainly raises the question whether religion might have some positive impacts on people. And so therefore, the person.
I've seen studies on that.
Well, I just want to say, Armin, you're my ally. Okay, there's no question about it. Like I overlap with you 90%, 85% maybe, or something.
Same.
Like that. So, but at the same time, I think that the way that you're attributing these things, like even religion and the way religions developed, had a role in developing sort of the secular mindset as well. Like I think there's a much more complex interactions between religion and liberalism, between religion and secularism, between how we developed the moral system in the first place that was derived from a certain kind of religious thinking. I mean, I think these things are more complicated than that. I don't think you can separate them as neatly as you have. I still think you're good at it, but I do think it's a little messier than what you're making it out to be. That's all.
So let me just say this, and I know the thing is, what makes a religion a religion? Right. I think that if you want to build a house, it has to have strong foundations to be able for it to last. Right. And if you build this house upon false beliefs, the whole thing will fall down. The whole thing will be crooked at some point. Right. So if you use belief in God, like I know a lot of religious people are liberal, but their liberalism is based on a strong foundation. Right? They're not saying I believe in God, I believe in the Quran, therefore I'm liberal. They say they're liberal, and I also believe it doesn't contradict my Quran. But the foundation of their liberalism is not on Islam or Judaism and Christianity. So the thing is, religion, what makes a religion is the source of my conclusions. It's God or something beyond math, something immaterial, something superstitious, something, and that makes it. I'm against all false beliefs, because if you come up with your conclusions based on false beliefs, most of the time you're going to get false conclusions. So good reasoning applied to bad premises gives you, more often than not, bad conclusions. And that's why I'm against any kind of foundation, any kind of building that is based on the foundation, based on belief in God or any other type of superstition.
But I
People
don't.
say, like, what if it's not harmful? I'm against even palm reading. Like, I'm against religion, but even if it's not a palm, like, how many wars are people fighting against palm reading? How many people are being beheaded? How many people are being executed? None, zero, right? But am I against palm reading? Yes. I fight against palm reading as a belief system because it's false, because it makes nonsense. So how could I not be against religion? I'm against any form of superstition,
I'm
and
not.
religion is a subcategory of that.
I'm not sure that your metaphor here works, right? So when you're talking about the foundations of a house, you're talking about something that's measured by physics, essentially, engineering, certain hard and fast objective rules about how the physical world exists, right? So, you know, if you want to use kind of standpoint epistemology is not going to give you a jumbo jet, or at least if it did, it wouldn't give you one that worked.
Or a
right?
toaster, even.
Yeah, or a toaster, even, or even a butter knife. Let's face it. But.
Can I tell you a story after this?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
However, you know, a person's internal narrative structure, the stories that they weave in order to justify the kind of person that they are, is not the same as the hard and fast rules of the objective world. And let me draw this to a point that we made earlier, because this actually underlines how dangerous things can be, right? So the three of us have noticed highly intelligent, articulate, knowledgeable people come out who are fully woke, right? Who are anti-Israel, who believe all of the propaganda, all of the Qatari propaganda, but they're still intelligent, they're still knowledgeable. How is it that they get that way? And my argument would be that they do so because the most important thing for them and their brains within their context is to send the signals of the people that the people in their group will value, right? So they articulate the woke cause really, really well because that's what they're using their brains to do. The external objective world is irrelevant to that. You know, the fact that they would be the first up against the wall in 1979, or who gives a shit? The fact that they might be the first up against the wall if the Islamists ever get to a critical mass within London, which could happen tomorrow, by the way. Literally could happen tomorrow on the 11th. It's kind of irrelevant. All that matters is the here and now. How do I use my brain to raise my status? And the worrying and the darkest thing about that is that it's actually adaptive to them on the individual level. It becomes woefully maladaptive on the social level, but on the individual level, yeah, it works.
But you have the same thing among religious people. You have that among, like, religion doesn't protect you from that. But let me just tell you one quick story about myself.
It could be adaptive or maladaptive. But go ahead. I want to hear the story.
Yeah. When I was a teenager, I was in Iran. One thing that constantly occupied my mind was the concept of hell and how terrifying that is. And I couldn't even imagine why people around me were not constantly trying to do everything they can in their power not to avoid going to hell. Like, people around me, they were focused on their grades, you know, their house, their fashion, what party to go to this weekend. But I asked so many people, do you believe in hell? Do you believe hell is a real place? And they were like, yes. And I'm like, why are you not spending every goddamn second of your life trying not to go there? I even burned my hand just to see how much it hurts to burn. And then I tried to imagine that all over my body for 10 years, for 20 years, for 100 years, for 1,000 years. And this is the punishment that was awaiting us if we did wrong. And one thing that I did, so in Islam, if you commit suicide, you go to hell, right? But if you there's no sinning before the age of reason. And for girls, that's 9, in what we were told in Iran. For girls, that's 9. For boys, that's 15. So that means that if I die before the age of reason, I will automatically go to heaven. Suicide is a sin, but there's no sin if I do it before age 15. So this whole I was so obsessed with trying not to go to hell that I jumped out of the window of my school.
Jesus.
I broke both my legs. I broke my left arm. I fractured my back. I almost got paralyzed. I got really lucky that even though I fractured my back, I didn't cut my spine. I was in a wheelchair for 7 months. I lost a year of school. And the only reason why I didn't try it again is because I saw what it did to my parents. It crushed my parents, right? And that's the only reason why I didn't try it again. But the point is that I was being completely rational. I still think to this day as an atheist that it made complete sense. Given the premises I had, right, it made no sense risk going to hell. If I died before age 15, I would have been guaranteed to go to heaven, and there was no chance of me going to hell. Given those premises, with my analysis and my reasoning was flawless. With my flawless analysis, I got a very dangerous conclusion because my premises were wrong. Right. And here's the thing about Islamic martyrs. This are
is where
correct.
I was going. They are correct.
They are correct. Given the premises of Islam, what they're doing is exactly, it makes no sense to do anything else.
Okay, so Armin, let me just give you an alternative experience growing up, okay? I grew up in a liberal Jewish household. We did Shabbat and rituals and so forth. My parents never told me what to believe. There was sort of an assumption that you might believe in God, but that God was probably this sort of very amorphous force that you couldn't define. He didn't really punish anybody. No one really believed in life after death. We just didn't have a very strong concept of it, okay? I remember when I was in college, I read something from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who was a Jewish, modern Orthodox Jewish theologian and an existentialist, who said, there are moments, I experienced moments of disbelief, he would say. That was part of the human condition as a modern Jew. He acknowledged that he didn't always believe in God. There were moments where he did it. And that I used to relate to that. But as time went on, I grew up, I became more and more sort of an agnostic. Maybe at one time I would have called myself an atheist, more of an agnostic. And now I would say I have moments of belief. Okay, that's that. And they sort of just enter my consciousness where I'm not articulating a view of God that I think anybody else should believe. It has no, it's just an experience that I have at certain times. And right. I don't discount it, but I don't make any claims about the larger world that you should believe in, anybody else should believe in. It's just an experience I have. Now, you can say, well, that's a false belief, and you can come up with, I'm sure, and maybe I will too, by the way. On certain days, I might agree with you that it's just some kind of, experience that I'm having that can be completely explained by the laws of nature. And I might say, absolutely, you're probably right, blah, blah, blah. But that doesn't mean I don't go through periods of my life where I believe in it in a certain way, and I think that's the part that sort of you're like. It's not that I'm making any claims of authority. It's not that I'm saying that there's a certain kind of God out there. It's just that there are times that my own experience makes me feel that there's some kind of entity that I couldn't quite pin down. And so I think your experience with religion and mine are just so radically different that I don't have to define it in quite the stark terms that you do, because that's not how I experience it at all.
Can I give an example of one of my moments of belief, if I may?
Yes.
And again, and I feel that exactly how David feels about it. I feel exactly the same. Like I would never use this, but what it gave me was, like sometimes reading poetry. Do you like poetry? Yeah. Like it gives you that kind of, like
when I understand it, yes.
Yeah, right.
Most of the time I don't
understand it either, right?
like when often one of my retorts to these people who are kind of saying that everything's all about the objective and it's all about things being right or wrong and the subjective doesn't matter. Well, it's kind of like, if you want to know about World War I and what really happened, well, then look at the statistics, right? That will tell you how many people died. But if you want to appreciate the horror, then read Wilfred Owen or Siegfried Sassoon, talking about life in the trenches and what was going on. And that will, because we're not at our core rational beings, right? Rationality is something that we have to learn.
We're not robots. We're emotional beings.
And for that reason, it's the poetry that really resonates with us in a way that facts just can't, and at least they can't until we really train our minds.
But poetry is not anti-fact. Poetry doesn't contradict facts.
No, it's not. No,
religion does. Poetry doesn't.
Right. So, but this is the mistake that the postmodernists would make, right? They would say that science is antagonistic to kind of subjective narratives, which is absolutely not true.
No.
It's, there are uses for both. And if you're an analyst, you would want to say, well, look, here's what happened during World War One. Here's the evidence. Here are the statistics. Now let's try and make psychological sense of it. Here's the poetry.
Science recognizes the benefits of poetry.
Of course, that was a rejection of the postmodernist way of looking at things, not the scientific one. So it's not a criticism of science or of subjective narratives. It is a criticism of those people who would say you have one or the other. And there are people on the side of science who claim to be on the side of science who would say that. And I would push back against them. And there are certainly the postmodernists who would say that with the whole standpoint epistemology thing. Anyway, where I was going with one of those kind of serene moments of belief that I found really, really helpful was when I was going through cancellation. And again, I'm not making any objective claims about anything whatsoever. I was going through cancellation, and a Christian friend of mine sent me a verse from the Bible that said something along the lines of, if the world hates you, then it is because you are of me and you are not of this world. If you were of the world, then the world would embrace its own. And that made a hell of a lot of sense with me. And it started to get me thinking, well, I want to align my moral identity not with the mob, because I could use my brain to be one of the mob, and I could do very well if I was going to do that, because I know their whole literature way better than they do, right? And I'm probably smarter than most of them too. So I could align my moral identity with all of this, but I'm not going to do that. I refuse to do that. Even though my refusal to do so is not in my interests. It's not in my career interests. It's not in my status interests. None of it was in my interest. So why am I refusing to go along with this? It doesn't make any sense for me not to go along with it. And I guess the answer would be because I was, and this was something that my Christian friend kind of helped me realize, because I was aligning myself with some sort of objective future morality, the future state that we would get to, where people would look back and realize actually Mike was fucking right to stand up against all of this horror. And this is the same reason why I'm standing up for Israel right now.
It's a bit of an act of faith in a way.
It's a
huge
bit of an act of faith,
right?
Well, this is why I'm standing up for Israel.
Depends on how you define faith. I don't think it's an act of faith. I think it's completely based on evidence and rational thinking.
It's based on rational thinking, but it's based on a belief that there will be a better future state. But in a way, I almost don't care.
Not all beliefs are.
That's
faith.
where I am too. I almost don't care. And I need to wrap it up soon, guys. But
okay.
No, this is I think we agree that Tel Aviv is a much better place than Gaza for gay people. I think we've agree that, and I think we've gotten to the nub of some of these interesting differences of experience and understanding of what religion is and so forth. We could probably do more of this. I thought it was fun.
Let's do another one at some point.
I enjoyed it very much. Yeah.
And let's conclude by saying, if we were to have this conversation in Gaza, the West Bank, we'd probably be murdered.
Right.
More likely in Gaza than the West Bank.
Yeah, because there are some Jewish settlements in the West Bank. So, all right. Thank you, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. See you later.